So, hello everyone. Welcome to another masterclass at SDI. And today I'm delighted to have Leo Chiang, director producer of Our Time Machine, with us. Leo's been a filmmaker for many years now and has hit many successes in the past. And this is his latest film. He's based between San Francisco and Taipei, so an interesting two very different continents to deal with, two very different set of audiences to deal with. So we'll hopefully kind of discover a bit more in during our conversation. Um, Leo's been doing also a lot of kind of mentorship and training, in different with different organizations. But what I think is also interesting is the fact that Leo is a co-founder of ADOC, which is the Asian American Documentary Network, and that has been very, very proactive, on the documentary scene. And there is also plenty to talk about. So today, what we'll do is I'll have a conversation with Leo for the first 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and it would be good if you guys can save or think of questions and join us with questions at a later stage. If you want, you can type them in the chat box, and we can read them later on. Or if you want to speak for yourself, which is completely allowed, then just wave, let us know, and you can talk to Leo directly. So that's the structure for today, and hopefully it will all go according to plan. So, Leo, welcome. I wish we could give you a big round of applause and show you the warmth that we've got in Scotland for international filmmakers. But just to have you here is a real treat. So, thank you for agreeing to this masterclass.
Thank you so much for having me, Noe. I'm very excited to be here.
And Leo is actually in Taipei tonight, so it's tonight. It's nighttime. So, thank you for keeping late hours for us.
Yeah, I am in the future. So since we're talking about time machine and everything, so I am where you're going to be in a few hours.
Hopefully in a good place. So well, let's start actually talking of our time machine. I mean, we can start with just refreshing our memory of the film by playing the trailer for those of you who haven't seen the film, and for those of you who just need to rethink it.
我呢，小时候就知道我父亲是个特别棒的艺术家，我就很渴望成为像父亲那样特别强大的男人。直到前段时间，我突然意识到父亲已经84、85岁了。
我从前上海京剧院做总导演，指挥千军万马的，我现在就是糊涂的，什么也不知道，也想不起来了。
这个作品对我来说特别难，我知道它特别难，但是我一定要把它做得很复杂、很强烈。这个作品就是我对父亲想说的话，想谢谢他们。好了，女儿的胡子也白了。
胡子白了，你瞎说。
Leo, this is the most beautiful, touching film. It really I've watched it several times, and every time it just really gets to me emotionally. But it's also a film which has been extremely well crafted. I mean, there's such amazing work there from you and your team. So firstly, let's kind of, introduce kind of, you and your collaborator kind of, on this project. Can you tell us a little bit about how this co-directing kind of came about?
Yeah, so my co-director, directing producing partner is Young Sun, who is a Shanghai-based director. He started the film when he was 25, and now he's about 30, I think. He was actually the one that first got connected to Maleonn. Young works a lot as a cameraman, and he was introduced to Maleonn because Maleonn was looking for somebody to make a short behind the scene video for the production of the play. And it was really, the original intention was really just that. He just wanted somebody to make something that's really more for marketing and publicity. But when Young met Maleonn basically told him the swimming pool story, which, if you've all seen the film, it's kind of the anchor story of the memory, and also the puppets actually acted out that interaction. So when Young heard that story, he was just incredibly moved, and he felt like there was something more to this story than just a 5-minute behind the scenes video. So he began to pursue a feature-length documentary. But being a sort of emerging filmmaker at that time, he had just finished film school not too long ago. He started, bringing the project around to pitching forums, both to find support from international funders and broadcasters, but also to look for collaborators. And I was born and raised in Taiwan, and I spent my time both in the US and in Asia, as Noe had already mentioned. And one of the things that I would do every year is I would come to Taipei, where the Chinese Documentary Pitching Forum takes place every September. And I'm actually one of the trainers, one of the mentors for the producers pitching. So Young came to the forum that same year. This was 2015, about 3 or 4 months after he started the project. And when I saw his pitch, and also actually my our executive producer, Chiang, who's a very accomplished Taiwanese American editor based in New York, we just reacted to his pitch so strongly. We were moved, and we couldn't even articulate why we were moved. We just felt like we had to be a part of it, and we had to help him because he was looking for help. So that's actually how I came on the project. I initially was working with Young as a producer, but I think it became pretty quickly to all of us that this film needed somebody who's in their 40s, the perspective of an older child, if you will, because that's really fundamentally what the story is about. And Maleonn and I are actually about the same age. So we really just decided that it made more sense for us to fully collaborate, that I would participate in the storytelling as well. But because I was mostly spending my time in the US, Young ended up shooting most of the footage, and I ended up directing most of the post-production. So that's basically how we ended up collaborating. And we started in 2015. We finished the film in 2018, premiered at Tribeca in New York, 2019. And here we are, 2021, and I'm still showing the film. So which is a really great thing. It's it's traveled quite a bit, and that that makes me very happy that folks are responding to it the way they are.
I think it's a film to stay anyway, Leo. I think it's not going to age as a film, so you might be going around for many more years talking about it, I'm afraid.
Well, I hope I get to make my next film, but I would be very happy to keep talking about this film. It just feels incredibly personal to me. I think Noe, you were saying about how it sort of speaks to you in a way. I mean, it speaks to me in a way that I couldn't describe it. It almost feels like, even though clearly it's a film about somebody else, but it felt like it's very autobiographical. I think that for those of us, at a certain stage of our career and at a certain age where we start to think about our aging parents and meaning of life and the fleeting nature of time, it just touches me. That story, the film or not, but the story itself just speaks to me in the deepest level.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I think everyone, well, most of us kind of, sooner or later get touched by our parents kind of aging. And the loss of memory is something which is so cruel, especially when you work in as artists in creating memories or playing with memories or reproducing memories. It feels all the more kind of cruel to lose it, really. So yes, I can see why you'd be identified. But before,
Yeah.
sorry, before we go into that, you started kind of working together kind of in 2015. That's kind of pre-COVID. So now it's becoming kind of standard, kind of directing films from far away via Zoom and WhatsApp. But how did you work with kind of Yang?
It's actually quite funny. So I was in San Francisco most of the time. Yang was in Shanghai. Our editor, Bob, is in Beijing, and Jean, our executive director, who's also our editorial consultant, is in New York. And we're kind of the core team, that made the film. So it was always remote. With Yang, we would often get on the phone and talk about scenes, talk about, what is the scene for, what we should be focusing, talk about the idea of whose scene it should be, even, should it be Maleonn's scene, should it be the dad's scene, should it be mom's scene, who should we be focusing on? And so lots of phone calls, lots of trying to anticipate what happens, lots of getting anxious about missing stuff. And then if my schedule allowed, I would come to China and we would shoot together. I shot the New York scene myself because the team, the Maleonn and the puppet, the theater production team came to the US, and so that was just me, and Yang didn't come. So it was very, very piecemeal. And, at first we didn't necessarily have enough resources to travel, to even hire a proper team. But we're lucky that both Yang and I have actually worked a lot as cinematographers, so we were able to do a lot of that work ourselves. But towards later on, when we got more resources, we were able to bring in multiple camera crews for the theater performances. After the show premiere, we shot a bunch of rehearsals. We actually shot several different live performances, and that allowed us to put together this multi-camera look for the showing of the play. So yeah, and then when we first started editing, I tend to like to trust the editor for the first pass. And our editor, he's a brilliant storyteller. He really should be a director, but he doesn't want to. He's sort of the perfect editor, right? He has a great story sense. He does not want to be with people and travel. So he just wants to stay in his edit room and tell stories that way. So basically what we did was we just gave him all the footage, and I think there was like 200-300 hours. Couldn't even remember how many. I mean, in the old days when you shot on tape, you know exactly how many tapes you have, but now it's just, these hard drives. So we just handed him the drives and say, hey, go to it, try give us an assembly. So it took him a few months, and then there was a lot of back and forth between me and the editor, Bob. I would talk about sequences, what I felt like was missing, what I felt like the trajectory should be, and then when it got to a point, I started actually writing out outlines. We use these. I believe in index cards. I don't know if is most of this audience mostly filmmakers, or are you guys?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I'm not. What I'm saying hopefully is of interest or familiar to you guys. So I believe in index cards, but when you're editing remotely, it's hard to do that. So we found this software where we basically were using virtual index cards where we were moving the outlines around and whatnot. But at some point, it became really clear that the remote work was not gonna be able to keep going. That we weren't making quick enough progress because we needed to make some more spontaneous decisions. So we decided to do what I called edit boot camps. I started to rent Airbnbs all around China, and we would all, me, and Young and Bob would all go to the same Airbnb, and we would stay there for 3 weeks, and we would sleep there and edit there, and maybe go out drinking at night to relax a little bit. But it was very, very intense, just kind of be in the same space for long stretches of time. And we did that in 4 different cities. So it ended up to be, sort of quite substantial. We did it in Beijing, we did it in Shanghai, we did it here in Taipei. We also actually ended up doing it in our executive producer's apartment, Gene's apartment in New York. Yeah, it was quite a journey.
So those different moments of editing, were they kind of linked to just a certain amount of footage, or were you working throughout the time of shooting and just building up like a rough assembly?
We started editing about halfway through production, and there were a lot of back and forth about, if we have enough material to build a full cut. We just didn't know. We didn't know where the father's illness was going. We certainly had no idea yet about Maleonn's romance and impending marriage and the child. So we started to try and put some stuff together, and then when we had more material, we started to figure out like, okay, what's the big approach? I think initially what we had imagined it to be a 2-character story, because at the beginning we thought that was going to be a full collaboration between the son and the father to produce this play. I mean, the reason why Maleonn even chose to do theater as this project to start with was because he thought he was going to design it and his father was going to direct it, because Maleonn had no experience in theater at all. So, but it became pretty early on to us that Maleonn's father was not going to be participating the way that Maleonn imagined that he would, and the way that we thought that he would. And we started to shift the focus from, wanted to do these 2 characters equally to just on the son, on Maleonn. We also knew that we wanted to follow the production of the play. That seems like an organic structure for us, right? There's a beginning, middle, and end. The play will get finished. It will go out. It will be received. Then that's in many ways a perfect timeline. And then we know that simultaneously we'll be following the family as they struggle with the aging of the father, and also kind of they themselves are confronting mortality in different ways. So that was really the basic concept, and that was actually what we did when we went into the editing room as well, that we knew that we had to kind of figure out the 2 timeline. But what we kept struggling with was that what was going to be the different stages for our main character Maleonn's mental state, because we needed to have that in order for the story to feel like it's evolving and that it's going somewhere. It's building up towards something, I mean, I don't necessarily believe that film should have a message per se, but I do feel like the kind of storytelling that impacts me the most, that I enjoy the most, the main characters go through some kind of transformation. And that was always the struggle for us when we're editing, is like, well, what are those transformations? What are the steps that gets, Maleonn at the beginning to Maleonn at the end,
Well, when you started filming, did you get any hints that somehow Maleonn was going to have some form of kind of identity crisis, that he's 40 years old, was going to be like a mirror to question himself and the meaning of life? I mean, did you get any indication that would happen?
No. I think that for us, we were kind of simplistic in our expectations that it would just be about him and his father. And actually, that was that was our big struggle at the beginning of the editing process, was that we were holding on to that idea, and it was getting us nowhere. And especially after we realized that there's not going to be this interaction or interplay in terms of the two characters evolving at the same time, because even though the dad, his condition got worse, his life view or his personal journey didn't really change very much. And also it got to a point where he was starting to tell us the same story over and over again, so there wasn't really anything we could build with his material. So we, after we realized that, okay, so this like focusing on the father-son relationship, and I do often talk about it as a father-son story, but when it's said and done, really the journey is Maleonn's journey.
Yeah.
And that was the part that was really difficult to figure out. And when we ultimately figured it out, that's when we felt confident that we had a film, and the structure for us is that at the beginning, it's almost like a fourth stage of grief, a little bit, that what Maleonn went through. At the beginning, it was a sense of denial, right? For him, it's like, well, yes, I know that my father is ill and that he's leaving me, but if I can just do this project, I can just hold on and keep him exactly where he is where I want him to be, and he'll stay with me, right? And when that clearly was not happening, he started panicking, right? He felt like he had to kind of he had to start to do things that felt more desperate, that he was trying to try to reach out more and try to offer his father more and try to connect with his father more, and he wasn't really getting anywhere. So the third stage was really sort of this hopelessness that he got to, which is kind of right around the time when the play was not going well and the father's not doing well. And then we finally arrived at the end, which is this sort of resignation, sort of a resolution of him deciding that to see what he's going through from a different perspective, to try to find silver lining in this situation, to find joy and beauty in the messiness of life. And that ended up to be Maleonn's journey.
And I mean, I love the way you structure the film around those letters to the unborn child. At one stage, did you decide to use that as a device to play with time?
Um, we knew that we had these very stylized, sort of magical realism, footage. We shot a bunch of stuff with dollies and cranes and, dramatic lighting, which is not something that we normally would do for observational documentary. And then the other half of the film was this very immersive observational documentary of this family. And then we were often finding ourselves in the most intimate and private situation with the family, talking about things that they probably wouldn't necessarily share with the outside world. We wanted to use both, and the magical, the sense of magic, the sense of sort of otherworldliness. Is that the right word? Yeah,
Yeah.
it is very important for us, And then we also very much wanted, especially the puppet, especially the young puppet Makuji. We very much wanted him to be a real character, not a puppet, but like a character. So those were the pieces that we had, and we were really we're struggling to figure out how we're going to transition in and out of these two types of very different material. One of our earliest cuts, when we got a couple of people to look at it and gave us feedback, they had said that they felt like Maleonn was very distant and a little bit impenetrable. For us, we thought that the reason was that he tends to, at least in real life situation, he tends to try and talk about things as if they're not too bad, or they try to sort of spin things to make it more optimistic and to be more upbeat. And when we start to put in his interviews, so we can hear from him directly, it just felt really wrong. And it didn't really help that sense of intimacy that the audience was craving for. I had watched a film actually, and it was actually a Taiwanese film a couple years ago. I don't know if you've seen it. It won the Teddy Bear Award at Berlin, I think 3 years ago. It's called Small Talk.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful film.
Gorgeous.
And for me, and I actually don't think that was the version that was shown. In one of their earlier versions, they actually, all the voiceovers were written from the director as a letter to her mother. And I was so struck by that format, which I thought was brilliant, because it could have been a voiceover from the director, but it wasn't. It was a conversation, even though it was a one-way conversation, but it was a conversation. So instead of the filmmaker speaking to us as an audience, the filmmaker is speaking to the character that we're seeing on the screen, and we are privy to that really private conversation. And that always stuck with me. Maleonn is also a writer. He's actually published a couple of books of essays, and like most artists, he's obsessed with the same themes. Doesn't matter what medium he uses. So he was writing a lot about time. He was writing a lot about memory. He was writing a lot about his childhood and his interaction with his father. And he started also to write some stuff that felt like it could be him talking to his future child, right? So we decided to take some of those pieces of writing and turn them into this dear child form. And we decided to structure it as a letter to a child, but maybe not necessarily thinking that it was about the child that he eventually had, but maybe it was about him speaking to the puppet. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's about him talking to, we do it all the time. We always use this sort of birthing analogy for filmmaking, right? Like it's your baby that you're giving birth to. So there was some of that of him. Maybe it's about his relationship with his work in general, right? Because a big strand in the film is about this, the life of an artist, the inner life of an artist strand, which I love very much. And I think which speaks to a lot of us who do this type of work. And it could be, the letter could also be something that his father wrote to him when he was a child, right? So we wanted that ambiguity.
Those letters were written before any baby came along.
Yeah, no, they were written before any baby came around. There was one that we actually wrote from scratch with him, but most of the other ones were excerpts from the writing that he had. So, and we just added "Dear Child" at the beginning, which we would be giving him to read, and he would never ask us why we're asking him to read all these letters.
From a filmmaking point of view, this is just an amazing device in order to get inside your main character, isn't it?
Yeah, and we felt like it was so much better than, it was infinitely better than an interview. We did everything we could to get rid of the traditional interviews that were in the old cuts. We felt like these letters are, because it is from a totally different perspective, it also allows us to use much more stylized material, that it provided the perfect transition in and out. And they're basically interstitials, which also move us forward in time. It served a lot of purposes, and it ended up to be something that we were, we felt lucky, or we felt very happy that we came up with this device.
And you've got a lot of transgressions in the film. From the outside to the inside of the character, but also the reality, which is not really reality with the puppets, the memory, which is constructed. You're constantly transgressing anything you're offering your audience, which is, you're teasing us with that, which is brilliant. And
everybody keeps mentioning the dream sequence. That dream sequence makes no sense. I'm fully aware of that. I remember just saying this to our editor. He says that dream sequence is not logical. I said, I don't care. It works. It just felt like, I don't know. This is maybe with this crowd that it has extra resonance. I don't know if you guys remember in the piano, there was an animation, a shot of animation. Do you remember that? The Holly
Yeah, yeah, no.
Hunter Jane Campion film, The Piano. I don't know if you guys are too young to
Oh, no,
remember
no,
that
no. The most sexy scene of having kind of, touching the wall. I'm sorry, you can't forget that.
But there was a shot of animation. If you do, it was like the Anna Paquin character was describing something, and it was like a little paper fire, and it was just it showed up, and it never was ever seen again. And I just remember for some reason that shot stuck in my head, and I just remember when I was looking at this dream sequence, I thought to myself, I don't really care that it doesn't make sense. It just felt right. And let's just leave it in there. And if somebody really objects to it, we'll look at it later. But and it stuck. I don't know. I mean, maybe folks are like, well, that that dream sequence makes no sense. But I just really loved it. I just thought it was sort of so interesting and so transgressive, as you said.
I think it's important for us filmmakers to kind of to work with our instinct, not just our kind of rational kind of being. So I'm all in favor of those scenes which do not make sense and yet they work. That's creativity as far as I'm concerned.
I certainly try. But I very very much agree. That's actually something that I'm really pushing myself to do more. I felt like for a long time, I made films that were in many ways, I love a tight, perfect narrative, and this is might be because I went to University of Southern California in LA, which is notorious for sort of Hollywood storytelling style. And I feel like recently I've been trying to unlearn that and really push myself to do a little bit, more that's outside of that more conventional way of storytelling. So yeah, no, I absolutely
We
agree.
all
And I'm
crave for the resolution of everything, so it's not surprising that
yeah,
narratives are so attractive. But we also live differently, where things don't get resolved, and we've got to learn with it. Okay. But going back to the puppets, I mean, early on you kind of mentioning about turning it into a character. I mean, those puppets are kind of inanimate objects. Why are we kind of, putting so much emotion into them? Why somehow they become alive and they touch us? I mean, what happens there?
we were with the puppet in all different scenarios, and you could see there's two grown women behind the puppet. One of them is speaking his voice. I did not see a single person interacting with the puppet who even looks up at all. It's always literally they're having the conversation with the puppet. They're touching the puppet. They're just sort of mesmerized by the puppet. We've also seen some earlier version, the puppet prototypes, that did not have the same effect. So whatever Maleonn did to build that puppet, and I think it had to do the proportion of his face and the eyes. It just felt like magnets for your attention. I mean, one of the things, so we actually, we became friends with the puppeteers, and especially Young, because he's the same age as most of the puppeteers. They actually kind of all hung out, and we shot a lot with the puppeteers. One of the puppeteers had a story of him losing his father, fairly recently, and we actually kind of followed him home, and we had all this material. But in post-production and editing, we decided that we had to cut out all the puppeteers because we wanted to preserve this, the humanity of the puppet, I guess, to not ever have the puppet not feel like a real person. So that was kind of a big sacrifice. We felt like we sort of sacrifice them in order for the puppet to really come to life, you know.
And the way you film them, it's really kind of like dead on, kind of, just like if you were filming a child,
Right,
your camera
right.
remains at the same level, kind of, as a puppet, which makes it even more of a person.
And that's what all the adults did. They kneel down. All the people who come to the puppet, they automatically they get down to the same level. They're having face-to-face conversation with the puppet, with the person speaking up here. So it's magic. I mean, Maleonn's work is, it is quite magical. It's whimsical, magical, profound. All of those things. And it's actually, I sometimes I feel frustrated for him, because I think that the reason why he's not more well known outside of China is because I think in the rest of the world there is a Chinese narrative that people are interested in, and that has to do with politics, and that has to do with dissent, and that has to do with all of that. And if your artist and your work does not speak to that, you don't get as much attention. But that's the way it is.
Well, talking of politics, I saw the way you brought the family, well, memory back to kind of Cultural Revolution. Really interesting, really. It's still not terribly safe to talk about Cultural Revolution in China. Let's kind of be frank. So tell us a little bit about how you navigated what's acceptable, but also what worked for the narrative of your film.
We had a number of different versions of the father's backstory. The father was quite accomplished, and we actually had some, interesting old archival material of both his work and of him working. And I think that it was a lot of the older versions had too much material, like it was too expository. It told too much of backstory. I think that people are interested in the now. But we also know, though, that the Cultural Revolution piece is absolutely pivotal. It is the catalyst that kicked off the whole entire film, and really, I mean, that event, defined the dynamics of that family, and many families in China. It is absolutely sensitive. It's less sensitive now than before, but it's still sensitive. We ended up with this sequence that you see in the film, which I don't think is more than three. Well, the actual part about the Cultural Revolution itself is only about 2 or 3 minutes, which is the mom talking about, the people coming to the house, basically, I don't know what the right term is. So that she realized that during that time the priority was to stay alive, and the work, their artistic life was secondary. So that ended up to be what the focus of it was about. The length hadn't changed, but we had actually different versions of that, and it was something that, as a Taiwanese person and an American person, and as somebody who's trained, as a documentarian with ethics and with certain, especially sort of journalistic principles, it was a kind of a difficult challenge to go through, because we wanted the film to show in China. We had to go through the censorship process. We actually sent the film through the censorship process. So the first version of that Cultural Revolution sequence had actual Cultural Revolution footage, books being burned, temples being smashed up, people, wearing dunce hats and dragged out to public. Those, very symbolic, or those shots that I think if you know about Cultural Revolution at all, you've seen them. Right away, we got a response from the film board said that this is not allowed. These are illegal foreign footage. So it kind of kicked us into a bit of a crisis because we had to really start figure out what we were willing to change. We certainly have a lot of colleagues who made films, somebody like Namfu Wang, or even more recently, 76 Days,
Yeah.
Hao Wu's film about Wuhan, that chose not to go through the Chinese domestic process of getting a permit so you can screen it in movie theaters. For us, we thought that we had a story that did not have that problem. And we also felt like it was really important for us to have the story being told in China. So we had to start to kind of ask ourselves, so how much are we willing to compromise? I think that we kind of just decided that, okay, let's just try a different way of telling that story. But if we were told to take the story out, then we would pull ourselves out of the process and not go through that. It's all very easy for me to say because I'm actually not, I don't have a Chinese passport, so I won't have any legal consequences. But, for my partners,
Yeah.
I'm actually, at one point I was kind of a little worried for them. Anyway, so the second version, we decided to use those old propaganda posters, with the all the Red Army holding up the Red Book. It was actually all very positive. It was sort of very, very sort of slogan, no good. And then we came to this version of using this stylized Peking opera performance footage, slow down, fighting, and with the mother telling the story in the background. And that was accepted. So that was kind of the experience that we went through. And I don't know if I ever want to go through that again, even though, it was, all things considered, very minor. It was quite challenging to confront sort of mentally.
But in a way, what you ended up with is talking about the consequences of the Cultural Revolution for this specific family, i.e., the father as an artist not being able to perform, really, not being able to work, and that's an interesting angle.
So we were always told that if we can keep the storytelling to a personal family level and not talk about the societal government politics level, that was going to be safer. So that part of it we were able to preserve, and that part of it is the most important part, right? I mean, that the reason why the father became who he was because he went through this really, traumatic experience, and he's still till this day a loyal party member, and he actually, it's kind of fascinating, I think, and I think that I don't think he's alone. I think a lot of people his generation still praise the party, praise the government for doing that. They felt like it was a necessary step for them to go through, even though they were the one that suffered probably the some of the most serious consequences. So I don't know. I mean,
there's still many more films to be made around that.
yeah, absolutely.
But here we get Maleonn, the main character, kind of somehow being abandoned, kind of, or not having the ideal relationship with dad as he wished to, because dad was obsessed with work. And I think that's a really nice way of getting back into the main structure of your narrative, where the little boy, kind of Maleonn, kind of wishing that dad was more available, or having to be good in order to deserve to have kind of dad's attention, and
Right.
as a grown-up man then to carry on kind of being the same. Please give me some attention, pay attention to me, and then it's too late, of course, kind of so I mean, that's kind of really interesting how political consequences have emotional consequences and sequels on people, and the journey that they put them on. But then him also then reproducing that obsession with work, as we all know very well as filmmakers, becomes also an interesting part of your storyline.
Yeah, the story with the bicycle, I mean, that was in many ways it was sort of a coincidence. We had no idea that that's where that came from. The images that he was so obsessed with, that he made it into this puppet, shadow puppetry, was actually that it was that pivotal moment in his life where he felt like he was, you know, he had sort of grown up and became his father's friend instead of just this child who can never get attention. So yeah, that to me was a beautiful story. It was such a small story, but it says so much, and it kept echoing and echoing in all his work, and all the way till the end, and with the images in that story. So
But also,
we really kind of lean into that bicycle story.
I agree. I mean, it's a fantastic story because it also
Yeah.
shows that we don't actually share memories. We remember differently. I mean, he would remember that moment as being a pivotal moment in his teenage life. I'm sure his dad can't remember, regardless of Alzheimer. So those kind of discrepancies in our way of remembering is also very important to be reminded.
Yeah, and I think that that's actually what we really set out to do when we were trying to build those connections, in the film, was we were finding some great little details that we're able to bring up over and over again to represent something much bigger, right? That story of that bicycle story, and then the subsequent images of the bike, it just represents the memories as a whole, not just that one memory, but just the life that they've shared together is all distilled down to that one particular moment.
Yeah. I think in a previous interview, Leo, you say that you tend to kind of, you only make films about people you fall in love with, that you can identify. Who did you fall in love with in our time machine?
I think I fell in love with all of them. I am absolutely enamored with Maleonn, and the funny thing is, I hope Maleonn's kind of never gonna watch this, but when Tianyi, when his wife first showed up, I was like, oh my god, that guy does not deserve this woman. She is fantastic, you know. She was so good to him, and so good for him, and how can you not love his adorable parents? And of course I love the puppet. Like I love that puppet so much. Recently we did a Q&A, and where Maleonn called in from his studio in Shanghai, and the baby Deng Deng is now almost 3 years old, so she's running around, and she's she's able to speak, and we brought back the puppet Makuji. And so I think it's the baby Deng Deng's first interaction with a puppet. So she was literally like, they were playing together like two kids, and Maleonn kept saying, oh, Deng Deng, meet your older brother, meet your older brother. It was just a lovely moment. So yeah, I don't know. I felt like my career may be more interesting if I was able to do some more sort of confrontational films where I'm face to face with the biggest evil or something, but I just don't have the ability to do that. And I guess in some ways I'm grateful that I recognize that I don't waste too much time to chase down those projects that really don't fit my sensibility.
But you also talk about yourself as being kind of, an in-between person. I mean, physically you're in between kind of, the States and Asia. I mean, how do you think this kind of in-between feeling of yourself kind of, helps you telling stories?
Um, I often like to think that you need to be a little bit of an outsider to tell the most relatable stories. and it's certainly one of the reasons why I got into documentary filmmaking, because I am fascinated by people and lives that are not my own, that I'm not totally familiar with. I think for me, it's so much fun to just once in a while look up and find myself in the most bizarre, random, place where I just have no business being at. That's always been one of the things that draws me to documentary storytelling. So yeah, so maybe my in betweenness, my otherness, my transnationalness, helps me tell these stories. I hope so. I mean, I don't know if that's what it is, but I hope so. But I also feel like I have this need to really try and make sure that the story reaches across the different communities and different culture, because um, I want everybody to feel like the story was for them, that they're reacting to the story, because they know they are the audience that the storyteller is aiming to reach. Maybe I'm greedy. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's not something that I should aspire to so much, but that's something that always been really important for me.
Mm. But I guess, I mean, we started by, or you started by talking about how China is not always, we don't always get a full picture of of China. In a way, I mean, a film like Our Time Machine kind of, brings us very, very close to the characters who may not share any of our culture, but still, I mean, could be a member of our families. So, I mean, that bringing together with them, I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, that's really documentary at its best, surely.
Thank you. I mean, I admire and adore a lot of the work that's coming out of China. But I do think that if you, I mean, it often does just fall into the one category, and I really would like to think that our film complicates that a little bit more, to remind people that beyond sort of some of the really screwed up and scary things that you might see, that there are people just like us, that there are people that we can really relate to, and have the same wants and have the same fears that we do. And I mean, this is maybe me being naive, but I just really fundamentally believe that if we can all see the world that way more, maybe the world will be a more peaceful place.
Well, that's certainly what we want. So I think I'm going to try to encourage our audience to join into asking questions. Have we got any questions, Alex? Kind of.
Not in the chat box so far, but please post them in the chat box or just unmute yourself and ask.
Anyone wants to have a go at asking questions? Well, meanwhile, while you're thinking, Leo, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the Asian American Documentary Network. Tell us about the organization.
So the group was started by myself and also my colleague, friend, fellow filmmaker, Grace Lee, who's a Korean American. I think that we began the group after realizing that we were basically had a parallel career. We graduated from film school at the same time. Our thesis film played in the same program in different festivals. But for 10, 15 years, we just kind of knew each other from far away. We just have make small talks, but never really got to know each other, became friends. And just by chance, one year we were sat next to each other at a friend's dinner at Sundance. And, as she would put it, it's like we realized we're like siblings from different mothers, that we're basically had the same interests and we're pursuing some of the same goals, and it sort of got us thinking, well, why isn't there a community or space where the Asian American documentary filmmakers can build community and find, collaboration, partnerships, and or just to have a group that speaks, about their concerns. So we just started super casually at Getting Real, which is the big conference that the International Documentary Association put together in Los Angeles every other year. And then, people join steadily, and now we have about 650 members. We have an online forum where people can just share about their film, have any questions, have job postings, or just chat with each other. And when we're still able to do that, we will host panels and have parties at different film festivals and different gatherings. We definitely got more and more international members as well. I think our goal is always that if you're interested in the Asian American storytelling in the U.S., in the community there, you're welcome to join. If you self-identify as an Asian American, you can join. So it's one of the several groups in the U.S. in the recent years that kind of self-organized and have kind of really become, I personally think, fantastic additions to the documentary community. Yeah. The other groups, there's a group called Brown Girls Doc Mafia, which is all the women of color filmmakers, and they've made quite a splash. They just raised a ton of money, on their own, and is now going to be regranting it to some of their members and filmmakers. So that's about 4 years old, and through COVID times a little bit more difficult. We've been having like happy hour online. Actually, I think last time there was a karaoke and game night on Zoom. So we're just we're definitely try to keep the community close during this crazy time.
But the cinema coming out of Asia is really, really exciting in the last few years. I mean, there's a lot of kind of creative filmmakers, both in fiction and in documentary, and it's so refreshing that it's kind of hitting the international scene, which tended not to be the case. So I think it's definitely a place to look for new talent.
I'm very excited about the filmmakers and the films that are coming out of Asia. I think for documentaries, unfortunately, the funding field is not as mature as I would like to see it. So I think that a lot of the Asian filmmakers ended up having to go to Europe and go to the US for funding. I would love to see that change. I would love to see more investment being made on documentary filmmaking. There's some really fantastic film festivals and organizations here in Asia. DMZ Docs in Seoul is a fantastic festival every October. They also have a really, really fantastic international forum. Tokyo Docs has a pitching forum too. For a while, Docs by the Sea in Indonesia, Indocs.
Indocs is brilliant. I mean, they show some amazing films there.
Yeah. So there are a lot of really great folks working towards, pushing the community, pushing the field forward. So, I'm optimistic, and Taiwan's kind of an interesting place. It's actually one of the few places that I know of that has a really vibrant theatrical documentary market. Although the films that do well here tends to be very nationalistic, very sort of, about Taiwan, maybe sort of highlighting or supporting Taiwan. But like there's been films that's grossed, hundreds of thousands, even up to a couple million US, up a couple million dollars, which for a population of 24 million is actually quite impressive. So yeah, I'm hopeful, and I'm hoping that I can play a small role in try to push the Asian documentary forward as well.
Alex, I think we've got some questions coming up.
Yes, we do have a couple of questions, and I'm going to start with a question from Ailey. She said, it sounds like the time it took to film and edit benefited the story in the end. How long was the entire production process, and did it take longer than you initially intended?
We started shooting in April of 2015. We finished basically in late 2018. So it took 5, 6, like 3.5 years. But the production, the last year we're waiting for the baby to be born, basically. So the editing, it was a little stop and go. We edited for a stretch and we stopped, and then we came back and edited some more. I don't think it took longer. For me, it's actually the 3 to 4 year mark is now pretty normal for an independent documentary. I think it'll be very different if you're doing a commission piece where the funding's already in place, where you have very clear deadline. And also when you're doing an observational documentary, you simply can't rush. I mean, I really do believe that. But the challenge there is, of course, to find enough resources to sustain this bad habit of ours. To keep going until it feels like the story is at a natural conclusion. I do think that the additional editing time absolutely helped. But I also know that most of us will take as much time we're given for post-production. So there has to be some outside pressure for you to finish, or else you'll never finish the film. I mean, you would just edit to the last minute, doesn't matter how much time you're given. So it's always this balance of if you have the luxury of the time, but also how much is too indulgent, to take so much time. I certainly know folks who take 8, 9, 10 years to make a film that come out to not be good. I certainly also know people who take 8, 9, 10 films to make a film that come out brilliantly. So I don't know. I don't have any, clear thoughts about what really works and what doesn't,
But there is a point where you get fed up with the film. I mean, working on it. I mean, let's be honest.
I feel like that's 80% of the time. Although this is a friend of mine once told me this. When you feel just like the darkest moment of the production process or the post-production process, when you feel like the film is shit, pardon my language, and that it will never get better, and that you're a crap filmmaker, and nothing will ever come out. That's probably where you're about halfway done a post-production, and then it can only get better from there. This is what I was told, and it's actually been pretty accurate. In my case, so yeah, I mean, I think that so much of this process, especially if you do sort of more independent work where you often are one of, a small handful of people pushing project forward, a lot of the work is about managing your mental well-being and to be able to really push yourself to keep moving forward, even when it doesn't seem like it's gonna happen for you. So the sheer determination I can't emphasize how important that is.
This is when you need a really good producer to keep doing the pushing.
Yeah, see, I feel like the Brits and the Europeans have it lucky because you guys do have this producing, partnership. In the U.S. and also in Asia, oftentimes the directors are left to produce their own work, and it's really less than ideal. And having a partner on board who really are in it with you is an incredible luxury for those of us who haven't had, necessarily that as a normal structure for us. So I envy you all.
Next question, Alex.
Yeah, so Leo has said it's a beautiful, elegant film with lots of cinematic imagery. What was the process of choosing the cameras and lenses you used for the film, and how did you work with the cinematographers to get such intimate portraits?
You'd be appalled by the camera that we use. So Yang, my directing partner, is the main cinematographer. He actually shot most of it himself. Part of it because we didn't have enough money. part of it is because he was a cinematographer, and part of it was because we felt like that was the best way to get the most intimate material. I do think that that's always a struggle you need to have. There, of course, there has been film teams that are larger than, that's sort of a really proper film team with the camera and assistant camera and a sound person and director who are able to get really intimate material. But that's definitely an added challenge when you show up with 4 people and you try to get those moments where a family member is talking to another and fighting or bearing their soul. It's tricky. So you really kind of have to really assess constantly what is the right thing to do. The majority of the film was actually shot on a Panasonic GH4, which is not, it's a pretty good camera, but it's not the best camera. For a while, we were toying with, I think at one point we got some really fancy, what are they? Are they ARRI lenses? Like they're cine lenses, like huge cine lenses. And the camera looked ridiculous because the lens was just like bigger than the camera body itself. And we got really, really beautiful bokeh, the sort of the depth of field, the dropping off of the depth of field and the color, but it was so shaky that we had to, the balance was totally off, that we had to, go back to like a regular Canon lens. So that's really what we shot most of the film on. When we got more resources towards the end, and when we were shooting these big shows, we did have Canon C300s, Canon C100s. But really most of the film was shot on a Panasonic GH4. And the sound was not great. We actually really had to work really hard to really, improve the sound. I'm grateful that a lot of the audience don't understand Chinese, so they don't really necessarily pay attention to how bad the production sound actually is.
Veronica has said this is a brilliant and touching film. How many filming days did you have?
I have no answer for you on that one. I don't think we actually even remember. I don't know. It's really interesting. I've been thinking about that a lot because I know that there are production systems where you have to be really disciplined with the number of filming days you have, and certainly that's how I was trained. In film school, that's what we were given, a certain number of filmmaking days. I've known folks who became really creative. So it pushed them to be more creative. That they came up with something that's stylistically, really interesting because of that. I also know people who ended up making not so good work because they just simply did not have enough time to do the story justice. So I don't know, maybe one of these days I'll give myself the exercise again to just be really restrictive in terms of the number of days and the amount of hours that I'm allowed to shoot. Maybe that will make me a more interesting filmmaker. I'm actually not being ironic. I feel like, I really do believe that sometimes having boundaries and having restrictions push you to be more creative. When you have all the resources in the world, you end up sometimes making actually something that's less interesting.
But in terms of, observational kind of documentary, you can't tell the future. You don't know. You didn't know that your character was going to become a dad, and you had to wait for the baby to be born in order to finish the film. All those things, you've got to embrace it.
And you didn't know that when the baby is gonna come 2 months early and no one will be in town to shoot it. We were freaked out when the baby came early, because we in our mind, the birth scene, right? Like not necessarily the birth scene, but the day the baby came was going to be the finale. But of course we end up with a scene that was much better,
Absolutely.
that ended up to be the scene that we needed. I don't know. I feel like one thing that I'm grateful that I've trained myself to do. And maybe this just comes with experience, that I don't get nearly as panicky and as worried when I miss things, because I do more and more realize that they're, even though with observational film, you feel like thing can only happen once. And if you miss it, you're screwed. The fact is there are different ways of telling the same story beat, and that there are other opportunities to kind of catch and make up for the things that you may miss. So life is saner that way, less stressful.
Well, Victor Kosakowski, despite kind of, being Russian and a non-believer, he's always talking about kind of, the God of cinema, kind of, creating opportunities and miracles, and verse are the ones feeding the stories. And it's true. I mean, it's always what takes you by surprise as a filmmaker, which ends up being the richest kind of, material. But we need to be attent to it.
Right. Yeah, you need to put yourself in the position of being lucky. I really do believe that, and Gunda is exquisite. It's one of my favorite films this year. My God.
Talking of identifying with the pig.
Yeah, yes, exactly. No, that was such a beautiful film.
Sorry, Alex, back to your questions.
We have a question from Evie asking how has this film, if it has changed you in any way as a person?
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a great question. I don't know. I feel like it makes me think about my own relationship with my parents much more. I mean, the fact that I am here in my parents' house today, is probably because of I've made this film. Now I think about these moments in the time that I spent with them as a priority. I would actually schedule them. I would actually think to myself, oh, I haven't done that for a while. I should make sure. And I mean, the funny thing is, when I'm in Taiwan for a long stretch, mostly because of the pandemic. I usually go in and out much more often, but I've been here since last March, and in the last few months, I've been sort of calling my parents and say, hey, let's do something. The rude awakening is that, like, they have a more active social life than I do, and they've got karaoke parties to go to, and floor arrangement classes, or volunteering at the museum. Like, they don't have time for me to come visit them. So I actually really had to get on their schedule early. So, but all seriousness, I feel like maybe, maybe I was really thinking about that, but I think that making this film has gotten me much more aware and conscientious about the importance of doing this. That I don't have forever with them. So yeah.
Another question from Theo. Were there ethical challenges during the filming and post-production on depicting the father's dementia?
So that's a really great question. That's something that we were constantly thinking and talking about. We were we struggle a lot with the scene, and you guys would probably all remember that scene. The scene when the father tells the camera that he's didn't remember seeing the play. When we first saw it, and I actually remember this really clearly. Jean, our executive producer, was like, I'm not sure we should use that. It felt exploitative. It felt like we were watching something, we caught something that we shouldn't have, right? But I mean, at the same time, we knew that that's actually, that scene and that moment, that interaction really is so pivotal. It it says so much about what the struggle is for both him and his family, that I think our job was to try and figure out a way to make it work. And you know, oftentimes in editing, there are certain scenes and sequences that kind of falls into place, and there are certain scenes and sequences that just keeps bouncing around and refuse to find a home. And that was one of those scenes that it kept moving around. We didn't know where it should be. We didn't know where it felt right. And ultimately, you know, yeah, I don't know. I ultimately, we felt like we found a way to have it at a place where it felt like we weren't doing the father a disservice by sharing that scene. That it felt like we were being honest about his experience, and we're being honest about what the family is going through. And we also ended up putting that scene right next to the scene where Maleonn proposed to his fiance, and to us, you know, that sequence right there really kind of swings the audience from one side of the emotional spectrum way to the other. And for whatever reason, that worked. You know, it just felt like that's life. You know, it's, you just don't know what's gonna come, and that's the full side of it. Besides that one, we didn't really have as much. We didn't felt like we were doing anything that felt ethically problematic. If anything, we were oftentimes mindful. I mean, I don't know if you guys noticed, but you know, we have a lot of shots of the father and son from behind. And this is sort of giving away too much. I would yell at Young about that. I was like, why are you so afraid of going to the front? I think he was really worried that he was intruding, you know, but that's the struggle, right? I think as observational documentary filmmakers, what is intrusion and what is, you know, being immersive and being observational, you know, like if you don't feel comfortable catching them from the front, are you being mindful, or are you just not, have you just not built enough of a relationship with your subject that you don't think they can trust you to do that? So there's you know, there's no answer for that, but the fact is we did end up with all these shots from the back, but we ended up just turning that into a style. I think that we just ended up having all these shots from the back. Oftentimes, every time the father and son get together, we see the scene from behind. You know, we kind of watch them physically interact with each other without their expressions. While in other scenes, we focus so much on their faces, right? Especially the father's face. Young talks about this a lot. He said that he was sort of infatuated with Maleonn's father's face, and that's why we had so many close-ups, that he just wanted to get as much detail as possible. So yeah, I know that last bit didn't have to do with the ethical part of it, but you know, it's always nothing's ever really clear when it comes to ethics, and everybody has slightly different boundary that they will or will not cross. I think for me, the important thing is to constantly have a conversation with yourself and with your collaborator about that, you know, and if you choose to do something, you really need to have thought it through and have a reason to do it.
Great.
I think the next question is also related to this idea, this relationship with the protagonist. So do you feel that Maleonn was invested in the filming process and happy with you filming for the whole duration of the 3 years? And how did you have to manage that relationship quite a lot?
A lot of that credit goes to Yang, because Yang was with Maleonn a lot. I think, you know, Maleonn and I relate very differently than Maleonn relates to Yang. You know, Yang is a good 20 years younger than both of us. So, you know, and so there's like sort of a generational relationship sometimes we have. But for whatever reason, you know, they, Maleonn teases Young endlessly. He gets mad at him. There's been situations where like Young Maleonn got really angry. Young had to like walk away, but Young always talk about how he has thick skin and he would just go back and continue to push forward. And this sort of, it's for whatever reason that relationship works, and they're like they're very good friends even now. So that certainly helped a ton in terms of the storytelling. I sincerely believe that we told the story that Maleonn wanted to tell. Not so much that our film was the film that he would have made, but the father and son story and the story about creative process was very much what he was trying to tell in his play. They were the same, the essence is the same. And I really do believe that our work is an extension of his work, that the whole thing is one large project about his family and about he and his father's relationship. He never asked to watch anything during the post-production process, which we're really grateful about. There's nothing more scary than showing the film, especially a film that's not finished to the subject, especially something this intimate. He saw the film with the audience at our world premiere, and it was a crying mess on stage and off. So I think that he's grateful. We also capture a lot of moments with his family that he didn't see himself. We had many interactions with his parents without him, and then he kept talking about how that was very special and also really heartbreaking for him to see. So yeah, no, we're fortunate. I mean, the director subject relationship is one of the trickiest things to manage in the documentary making process. And I think we're lucky that somehow this one worked, even though it was not without drama.
Yeah, and Beth is asking about unconventional storytelling methods. If there's anywhere else that you find inspiration for different ways of telling stories in documentary.
I am pushing myself to watch. I'm a cinephile. I love films in general. Fiction, nonfiction, and also my partner happened to be a set designer for theater. And so I get to watch a lot of plays without having to pay. So that's really great. And so I feel like I'm always, very curious to find out about any kind of very individual languages that a lot of the artists have, and I feel like a lot of times there are things that you can't even replicate, right? They've somehow created their own way of communicating, and they tell their story their own way, and that's what I'm still in the process of searching for it. I want to be more unique and be more distinct and to have a stronger signature in the way that I tell story, and I don't think I'm there yet. I would say I'm not even anywhere near there yet. I'm just kind of on the journey there. So I do think that you just have to keep, looking at work. It could be any kind of work. It could be, like I go to the museum very regularly because I get inspired by, anything from painting to video art or whatever. So I think that storytellers are storytellers, and we should just try and hear as many stories as possible.
And with the next question is actually about what is your next project, or what themes would you like to explore next?
I am in deep avoidance of my next project. I was actually I got a Creative Capital grant, which is a really fantastic organization in New York that they support artists across different medium. so I got that to make a personal film about me and my family, about my immigration experience, called Parachute Kids. You know, in the 80s and 90s, a lot of the children from East Asia were sent to US, Australia, some to Europe, UK, without their parents because of this combination of booming economy, but increasing uncertainty politically and socially. So a lot of kids kind of grew up, you know, in a foreign culture. They're basically sort of unaccompanied minors, you know, and I was one of those. And it was something that had profound repercussion to our family. And so I'm trying to figure out how to tell that story. And, you know, I think that the goal I set out for myself was that I was going to make sure that anything goes, that I was not going to exclude any way of storytelling. I was going to push myself to go beyond, you know, the observational and or the sort of the interview B-roll conventional way of doing historical documentary. So, but it's also incredibly frightening to me. I know that in order to, the film can only be good if I'm really 100% committed, which means going to maybe some pretty deep, dark places. And I haven't quite figured out how to do that yet. I think that, you know, that's kind of what I am doing. That's my New Year resolution. That's what I'll be doing for the next few months, is to really kind of push myself forward on that project. At the same time, you know, I'm also developing a bunch of projects here in Taiwan with a production company here. Taiwanese stories don't get nearly as much attention as mainland Chinese stories. I mean, people are just fundamentally more interested in China. So I'm trying to figure out how to work that, how to find stories and how to tell stories that will be of interest for the international audience. So yeah, since I'm here, you know, I would say I'm stuck here, but I'm actually really fortunate to be at a place where COVID is totally under control. I know that, you know, might be hard for to mention that. But I feel, you know, very fortunate, and I feel like if I'm gonna be here and I'm gonna be able to live my life, I should make a film, or else I would not, you know, I would not do myself justice for having the privilege of being in a place where I don't have to, you know, be inconvenienced and go through as much suffering as you are doing. So hopefully a film or maybe two will come out of it.
Sounds like you're in a good place, Leo, not just kind of, you know, physically you know, the geography of it, but mentally to tackle the next project. So that's great.
We'll see. We'll see.
Well, I mean, you've made our time machine where you identify very closely to the main character. Now you're moving on to a personal film. It's a little step.
It is a little step, and then I'm sure my father will feature prominently in my film too. So, yeah, we'll see
Well,
what
don't
happens.
forget the mothers.
Yeah. Oh no, that will not be a problem at all. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Plenty to be said there. I
Yeah.
think we're coming to the end of our questions. So maybe that's kind of, you know, a wrap. Leo, thank you ever so much for being so open about the entire process, and thank you for sharing it with us. And we really look forward to be able to welcome you back in Scotland physically one day, and who knows, the next project.
I hope so. I'm looking forward to that day, and hopefully that will be sooner than later. And thank you so much, Noe. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And please stay safe and healthy. And hope to see you in person in the near future.
Thank you, everyone. And I think we've got another masterclass next Friday, haven't we, Alex? I'm lost in the weeks.
Yes, next Friday there will be a masterclass with Irina Zilik about her film The Earth is Blue as an Orange. It's at the same time, 2:00 next Friday.
So a very different film, a very different director, but also fascinating. So see you all soon. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.